except it's got a few more details on it. I think it's actually easier than the teapot drawing.
Which was more successful, the Macintosh or this iMac?
They were both successful. I think the Macintosh was more revolutionary. It was the first computer with a mouse, and similar kind of platform though, actually. They almost went back to the basics with this one, kind of back to what the original Mac was.
What year did this come out?
98. And this was the first forte of Apple's comeback. It wasn't anything as big as the iPod and iTunes would become, or later the iPhone, but it was like the first hurrah that, wait a minute, maybe Apple might come on. Apple was dead and gone. They were done in the 90s. It was like niche product that a few graphic designers every year bought. It was nothing. And then suddenly, there's a few things happening in the late 90s, and by the early 2000s, it explodes with iTunes and the iPod and all that fun stuff. So,
How much was it?
these were about $1,000, roughly.
I'm sorry, what year was that?
98. Okay, so here we go. We got to make this one fast, folks. Real fast, but this will work better for us. We're going to start kind of in a similar fashion. I'm going to create perspective line, kind of moving through this. I'm going to go a little more shallow, maybe. A little more shallow perspective line. We're going to draw a section view on a side plane, much like that is, but in this case, because I'm drawing the rear of this, I'm going to draw my vertical line kind of out here a little bit to the right, and let this kind of become my, I'm going to come not quite that far, pull back just a little bit, give myself room. I'm actually laying this out just to kind of be able to fit it all here. One of the things that I'm going to want to do, let's get kind of the side view going here, because I do think this is really important. Let's look at the side view. This right here. What do we see?
A circle.
We see a circle that I drew to kind of represent a little bit what's happening here on the rear. But look at what's kind of happening on the overall proportions here. This is really close to a square. In fact, you're right. It's actually really close to being a cube. May not be spot on, but it's close. So what we want to do is kind of think about this a little bit as a cube unit. I'm going to say that this plane off here in the distance, and we're going to make this the plane that the screen is on. So I'm actually kind of drawing the beginnings of what would become the screen plane. Now you'll notice the screen is actually leaned back quite a bit too. Look at that angle. I mean, it's not even close to vertical. Leaned back a lot more than the early Mac. I don't know what that angle is, but it's significantly rocked back. I'll get back to that in a second. But let me go ahead and I'm going to set a height of this so that I can, in fact, be ensured that I can fit it here. And I'm going to try to get a little convergence, although I'm just not feeling it here on that convergence. And I'm going to carry this convergence through that point. So again, setting it up much like the teapot to give myself cross-section planes to draw on rather than faces of the outside. Does that make sense? Now, one of the other things about this, like all CRTs of this time, it's a 4x3 format. It's a 4x3 screen, not the 16x9 that we have on most of our digital and flat panels. So it is more square-like. But since I know this is kind of a cube, I tell you what I'm going to do, and I know this, I'm going to leave this as the center point of my screen, center line. I'm going to come on out and draw myself. This is actually where I messed up the first drawing. I hope I get this one right. I'm going to draw myself the representation of that front face square. So what I'm trying to draw right now is actually this, that square. And I'm trying to make it square, trying to get the proportions right, and I'm splitting it through that center line. That's pretty close. I found out about 3/4 of the way through the previous class that I did that wrong. I got that proportion wrong, and it started fouling me up when I got out there on those curves. It was like, whoa. So this is a little bit closer, I think. And I can, let's see, do I really want to, I don't really see a reason to extend these lines back so much. I'm just going to start to drive directly off of this center plane. And so what I want to draw on this center plane is this cross section, right? Like I cut this right down the middle with the bandsaw. And I'll notice that, okay, I have a fairly kicked back angled screen, so let's just simulate that. If I say that I need to figure out where this starts, that's up the ladder a little bit there. So let's say that this point right here, can y'all see that? The point where that angle starts kind of, or I guess you could say it's right there. I'm going to kick it up. Yeah, I'll come up from the bottom right about here. I'm going to say that bottom height is right about there. And I'm going to say that screen kind of leans back to, say, right there. Sorry, right here?
Yeah.
I'm just setting up, this is totally eyeballed, but I'm just setting up points based on kind of what I'm seeing. In fact, it may lean back more than what I just drew. It's possible it does. Maybe give it a little bit more lean back there. Then what I'm going to do is come in here and lightly connect those lines. I don't technically have to do that, but that's actually part of the cross section of this. And you'll notice I did it with a slight arc. And you'll also notice my pencils are getting very dull. So my lines are getting thicker and furrier. But I went from that point to that point. That's the center line of my leaned back screen. Now what's going on here? This actually cuts back underneath. And where does it cut back to? This is almost center. Look at that. So this drops to almost where the center point is, almost where the back hits the ground here. So before I go too much further, let's go ahead and kind of estimate this as a square from that forward part back. What would a square be? It would be somewhere right in here. So I'm going to go ahead and put my vertical square in there. This ends up being my square. Get the square in perspective, in proportions first. If you don't hit that, you're not going to hit it. So if I know where that is, technically I could diagonal cut this and figure out midpoint, but I could also just eyeball it. That's quicker. I'm in a hurry. So I'm going to eyeball midpoint, and I'm going to drop that line right there. That's almost a straight line.
So we're drawing this looking at it from the back.
That's correct.
Okay.
Looking at it from the back, just like the teapot, really. Looking at it from the back, 3/4 view. Slightly looking down on it. Same idea. Okay? Now, I'm looking at this, and the more I look at it, I'm thinking, you know what? I can see this is kind of a square. It also feels a little bit like a squatty square. So I'm going to actually add a little bit more back to that square before I start changing this up too much. Let's add a little more back. Because I feel like it needs a little curvature. Look at how this drops. It drops hard and fast. Really, in this last section here, you can see where that hits. And where does this hit? By the way, where is that point? It's really close, maybe just a hair below midpoint. So I can probably mark that somewhere right in there. And now can you just hit that line? Can you roll that arc and try to keep it tangent here? I'd do the top half first. And I'm going to start it, roll it hard, and then kind of let it flatten out a little bit more in the middle. Yep, I think that's better than my first one already. Maybe a little more curvature in there. Maybe. And then I'm going to do the same thing here. Here it dives into the bottom, so doesn't actually finish in the same way. It rolls really hard and then kind of dives in. There's my cross section. There's my bandsaw cut. Is that making sense? Now, Johnny Ive did us a favor because he put, unlike the teapot and Russell Wright, he put all these nice part splits and breaks on here. It shows us contour lines already. We don't have to imagine them, actually. They're actually here for us. And so this actually should make it a little bit easier to draw, I think, than the teapot. So one of the things that's going to happen here is I do have to figure out what the width of this screen is. I'm going to go ahead and get to these four corners. This is nice. These are rolled corners, but let's for the moment call them corners. These front four pieces here. Let's get to those because they help us flow all of this other stuff out of it, right? So two of these corners are pretty easy to find. They're down here on this forward plane that we've already drawn. We can find that front corner and say, all right, corner number one is over here on the left side. The other corner closest to us is right here. The top corner is a little different because this is tilted back. I can't just go to these two. I actually have to pull back whatever that distance is. So, but if I actually come back, my lines are furry, but if I come back through that middle point, left and right, and then if I use my wrap back method through that point, I should have a point that's right in there, and I should have a point that's right in here based on that. Does that make sense? Because this is tilted back. It's not right up on that plane. And this gets me close. Now I have my 4 points. So I'm going to go on in and connect these because it's an easy win. Get that arc running through there. And let's go on and do the arc through here too, even though that one's going to be largely behind what I'm seeing. Remember, this screen face is curved. It's actually not flat, so it's totally good that you're putting arcs on this. This is probably the first thing we've done where, you know, straight lines drawn as arcs actually help you out. They actually, as long as you get the arcs going the right way, this curved panel is working for you. And this is, honestly, if you get this much of the drawing right proportionally, you're 75% of the way there. If you've got this out of proportion or out of perspective, no amount of curve work from this point on is really going to save it. I'm feeling a little better than this one. So far, I'm liking this one better than the first class. The other day when I did these, I actually did better in the first drawing than the second. But today, I'm feeling number 2 is working on these better than number 1. So let's see what happens.
Sounds like it's our group.
Maybe it is. Maybe it's just you guys. All right. So what's next? What's going to help me the most? I'll tell you what I think would help me the most is to find this line. You know, Johnny Ive, he developed this thing with a top and bottom half that really is a predominant line that if I can figure out where it hits up front and hits in the back, I'm good. Just so happens I know where it hits in the back. It's right here at that point that I've already drawn. I just need to figure out where it hits in the front. So what am I going to do? I'm just going to estimate it comes up above this height, another, I don't know, a small unit up. If this is that height off the ground from here to here, it looks to me like it finishes about right there. So I've got to draw this wrapping around to that point. If I was to take, and I should do this, and I will, carry that point over to this, it gives me where it's going to finish out there. So I'm going to end up with this real thin ellipsoidal parabola kind of line that goes through this point, and comes back to this point. But it's going to come out beyond this line. Much like the teapot, I do have to be careful and not let it just become tangent there. That's not what it's doing. Is there any way to really estimate that? I don't really know. There probably is, but in this case, I'm just going to kind of give myself a sense that probably right in there is as far out as I should come with it. It should come a little beyond, but not too far beyond. You can see it's way out beyond here. I don't know, maybe it's a little further. Maybe it's about right here. So I'm going to just draw this and try to remember that it swings way out from this line all the way around, and it's going to cut back. It cuts back against itself right here. This whole thing is on an angled plane, but that plane is actually very difficult to discern from the particular angle that we're viewing this at. We tend to be looking down on it. And so again, this angle is a little easier to draw. I'm going to draw it upside down to make sure I hit the right mark here. I need to hit that. Wrong one. So we're building out this wireframe of this in a wireframe form is what this is called. So now I have this shape, which represents that split line, and it's coming at an angle, but though it's difficult for me to actually see that angle. I'm going to also fill in the footprint here while I'm at it. So I know that this point, can you hit that? Yeah. This corner rolls around, drops down, comes through this point where it hits, and then goes back to there. So once again, I can create, it comes back straight a little bit first. So I'm going to kind of replicate that as dropping back more or less straight in perspective, and then it rolls a little bit quicker. So let me try and see if I can hit that. So straight back. I'm going to come back straight back over on this side a little bit, and then kind of find a common break point where it rolls, which is right there and right there, and I'm going to roll that. And all of this is very blobby, so it tends to blend together. You just don't see it that easily. Okay. I actually just kind of quietly filled in a little right there, which I probably shouldn't have done because that was a section line, but I'll come back and fix that in just a second. I got tempted to do something there. Now in this case, I need to find that outer boundary, right? And that outer boundary starts where this corner is and rolls around and catches tangency right here. So sometimes I like to go on and draw that tangency first, that arc, to kind of see where I'm headed. And it gives me kind of a sighting point. So I'm going to roll this back up. Yeah, I'm sighting to that point up top and rolling underneath. And now at this point, again, it rolls underneath and becomes tangent back up underneath. And I don't really end up seeing what happens to it because it dives back up underneath there. Now there isn't really a line doing that over here. Technically, if I wanted to draw a third line, I could do that, but there is no edge there. So it's kind of deceptive you don't really want to get into that because it's technically is not going to be in your drawing and doesn't really help you. But my next step, I think, would be to give myself one more piece that kind of makes this product look really interesting, and that is this wrap over top, which, let's just look at it on the physical thing here. So another great part split. This whole front face bezel is one material, stuck on the front, but it rolls. It rolls over the top, and it arcs this direction. So you end up with this kind of waterfall thing going on, right? In fact, he's even fluted the plastic to kind of do that. So it rolls around, and so we want to create that. We actually have most of the geometry to be able to do that pretty easily here. And even though I've drawn these as corners, we're going to want to make them radiuses, and we know that. So I'm actually going to go ahead and start that. I'm going to put a generous radius right here on this first corner. Make sure it's all blended to that line. And I'm going to go ahead and put a slight bow on the top of this too, just to give it, there's really no side of this that's flat. I'm having to put this thing almost in my lap to get you to see it. It's like the camera is, this table just needs another foot of width here. So because my pencils are going dead here, that's way too thick, but the idea here is that that's bowed, and I'm building kind of a waterfall edge on this. How far down in the design does that does that wrap get? Well, it comes down not too far because I got this big handle and other stuff. I'm going to put a tick mark on that center line somewhere right in there to come to. And I'm literally going to put an arc, a slight arc into that because that's kind of rolling. And then I'm going to blend that up into that beautiful radius and then roll it back around. There you go. And there's a little apple mark up in there too. I'll put a little ellipse that kind of represents where that apple's going to be. All right. Man, what else? What are we doing here? We're okay. We're catching back up on time. Okay, I'm feeling better about time. This is easier than the teapot, I think. I think this is easier than a teapot. Procedure is very similar, but there's details here to follow. So before I get too much further, let me tell you a trick. I actually drew this too far over on my page, so I'm not going to have a lot of room here, but let's put the keyboard in. Now look, I know you don't have any less room than I've got over here. I'm tight as a drum. Look at this. I can't get over here. Let's put just the corner of it. You're not going to see all of it. But look how thin it is. Look how thin it is compared to that other keyboard we looked at the other day. I'm gonna set this off. You know why you want to do this? There's a reason. It's going to make the drawing look better. It gives you yourself something in a rectilinear perspective, and it allows you to kind of see where ground plane is a little bit more clearly for this thing, because this product tends to look like it's kind of floating. It's an awkward shape. Weird to see the angles on it, and it's awkward to see. So I'm going to just real quickly on the back side of this put in the beginnings of that keyboard. Not much, but just a little bit back there. And again, keyboard very different from the first one we looked at, but that's enough. Look at that. I can't get it all in there. Just enough to show that there's something on that ground plane with it. Okay, so I've got this line, which is the belt line of this thing. I really desperately need a little more sharpness. I'm going to switch pencils here. That's all right. I'm going to keep going. I think I can get it, but I'm going to go ahead and darken a few of my lines just to give myself an easy win. So I'm feeling like I need to make this thing look better. I'm going to hit a little bit darker line, and then I'm going to interrupt it. Remember the interruptions we do here to exaggerate a part split? That's a nice little trick to kind of say, is that part split really that thick? No, it's not. It's beautifully crafted. It's hardly there at all, but do that interruption in your drawing, and it really adds a detail. It really, you accentuate that change. I'm going to roll this corner a little bit. I'm going to darken this and roll this back. And I'm going to hit a little bit darker the actual area that's sitting on the ground, because it is a little darker right underneath there. I'll blend that back up underneath. And then I'm going to hit this line, the top part of this line. I'm just going to try to keep a double line here if I can, and hit the top part of this line. Just don't have any pencil tip anymore, but hit the top part of that line a little bit darker. And roll it. Keep it rolling, and it's going to come to tangency. It doesn't come to a point right here, folks. It actually turns and blends right in. And then I'm going to put a little interruption out on that corner. In fact, the interruption I actually do darker than I did the line, just to kind of point that little spot out. And I think that really helps. Those little details really kind of help that. Okay. Really wish I hadn't hit this so dark up top. I overdid that. My pencil was too dull, but we'll keep rolling. All right. I got a big handle, and I got another Apple logo to do on the back. So I'm going to put an Apple logo right here. This is done again with an ellipse. I'm going to make that ellipse's minor axis look like it's going through the point normal of that cross section right there. Point normal being the perpendicular of that cross section. So that's a good way to kind of think about how to do these ellipses that are on that center. It helps when they're on the center because it gives you kind of a reference to do these minor axes on the normal of wherever that point is on there. So I've got my Apple mark that I can put here with my little, this is kind of going on there. And now I've got this crazy handle, which is, honestly, this handle's the worst part of this whole drawing. It's the hardest part to get right, I think, because it's somewhat like an ellipse, but it's not quite. And even in 2D, it's not quite an ellipse. It actually is a bit of a flat ellipse. But then it's also having to be on this plane, or not on this plane, but on this curved surface. So it's doing all kinds of crazy stuff. I'm just gonna give myself a mark for how high to make it. I'm gonna start it right about here, which looks about right. And I'm going to end it right about here, which also looks about right. Give myself a high and a low to hit. In terms of width, this gets a lot harder. I'm essentially going to sketch an ellipse to the point normal on this center line, just like I did these two, as a starting point. But ultimately, I'm going to have to kind of fudge this as I get into it. So think of the minor axis of that ellipse essentially kind of coming through, being more or less in that direction. That's a point normal through the cross section, and see if you can do it. Now the end of that ellipse is going to end up almost tangent right here. It's going to disappear really and be more visible on this surface over here. So let's see if I can get it somewhat close. Close. That's not too far off. You see, I missed it a little down here, low here, but the idea is, in fact, that's curving and changing. So, do you see how I did that? Now, I did an ellipse with a minor axis more or less being at the point normal where that came through. That at least starts me out. I mean, this isn't technically an ellipse. It's actually a little wider than an ellipse. But for me, it helps me to see an ellipse here more than it does anything else. If I drew a square, it's not going to help me so much. So, for me, an ellipse is closer to the shape I'm trying to hit than anything else. And now I'm just going to go in and kind of craft some width into that to kind of try to hit a little bit more accurately the shape of that handle, which is a little wider, honestly, than an ellipse. And I'm going to drift that out a little bit more here and roll it a little more there.
Handle that you said was poorly designed?
I think it's poorly designed, mainly because the item itself is too heavy to hold by a handle like that. This is very heavy, actually. In fact, the handle's breaking loose on this one. You can't really, it's just not really meant to hold that much weight. It was more for decoration than anything. The magnet in these cathode ray tubes was quite heavy. So that gets me close. I'm going to then come across here. It has the handle itself is arced, so I'm finding kind of that midpoint, giving a little of that curvature back that I know is there in that shape, and knowing that it's going to roll around a little bit, and giving some thickness to that handle, which follows something like this on either side. And now I have to kind of replicate that form in this shape, which is not easy, to be frank. This is just the hardest part, I think, is trying to draw this ellipsoidal kind of handle on a curved surface. I honestly don't really try too hard to make it on a curved surface. I almost just try to get the perspective right and do my best to kind of make it look close, because it's tricky. And then I want to build a little thickness into that handle here where you can see that. And shading may help a little bit here. And these are all rounded too. I haven't really put the radiuses in yet, but these are all kind of rounded out, blended. I might have made the handle a little bit small. Could be a little larger than that. If I get frustrated or bored in an area, I just come back and say, I want a little more shadow around that keyboard. Maybe that would look good with a little bit of a reflectivity going on back there. That's what I like to use this for. Build a little bit of shadow and light to kind of make it a little more interesting. Then I get back to my work at hand. Come over here and try to hit that line a little harder. Try to come in and redraw a little bit more clarity, that line that wraps and rolls. And then I'm going to hit a few lines harder right in here to start to really hit that handle harder. Once I'm feeling like I'm close, remember, keep those curvatures there. It helps maintain the look of that curved portion. And this also can be an area where you want to use some shading to kind of pop that handle. Sometimes this is a good spot to do it in. I could come in here and put a little shadow on that thickness of the handle. These are clear parts, so they're not really going to technically show a whole lot of, you're not really going to see a whole lot. I tell you, a contour line right here can help, just drifting up underneath, kind of showing that section almost of where that handle dips underneath, putting a little shadow in there. Again, no more than 5 or 10% shadow usually. It's just don't overdo it. So much about design is really that. It's not going for the gusto, but actually just doing what needs to be done and not more. There's definitely an opportunity to overwork a drawing and to do more on it than you should. That kind of happens sometimes. You should always be trying to make sure your drawing is the best it can be, but there is a point where you can be overworking it too. What else is there here? I might want to put in some more, a little bit more reflectivity here. Any shadow and light, I might put a little shade and shadow here on this keyboard just to knock it back. Sometimes it's nice to kind of have, that shows depth, shows layering back in there, just to hit a little bit of shadow in there. Yeah, technically these edges are all falling away, so to have a little bit of roundedness to the shadow here might not be a bad idea, especially down on the lower part, down in here where you know there would be shadow. So maybe hitting this a little bit might not hurt, but you got to be light-handed with it. Three-line weight is still more effective in most cases than shade in I think. You can do shade and shadow with three-line weight and not necessarily have to do that much. If you really nail the line weights, you don't have to do that much. What else is there? Gosh, I didn't put a power cord on there. They actually exit from the opposite side, so technically I don't have to show it, but boy, would it add a lot just to put a little power cord here to show where that surface of that, and especially if I foreshorten it and actually make it a little thicker down at this end than it is on the other side, that could be really nice little touch. I reversed my shadow there. I shouldn't have done that, but FRE 15. if I'm looking at this, I'm feeling like what would help it. In fact, I'm going to do it. Yours doesn't necessarily have to have this, but I'm looking at kind of the translucency. What do I have, 10 minutes? I'm going to do this in less than 10 minutes just to add some depth. Look at kind of this vast amount of space with nothing in the drawing that's kind of ill-defined because there's no corner there. It's awkward, right? So, it's not going to do much, but I actually kind of like looking at these translucent details that I see inside. So should I draw the cathode ray tube? Should I draw some of these internal components just to give some depth to the inside? You know what? I absolutely should. So I'm going to do just a little of that. This isn't going to help my perspective at all, but it might help me get a little bit of detail going on down in there. There's a couple of kind of marks that are driving that are going up in there that look like they might be up underneath and wrapping around. There's this second part that kind of rolls around. Actually, yeah, that's a nice roll right there that kind of follows that offset. Really kind of adds a little detail down in there. And then how would I draw those magnets to the CRT? These are cylinders. You probably can't see these, and you may not be that familiar with a CRT, but it's essentially a series of cylinders stuck to the back of a tube that looks kind of like this. It's round, and it has kind of a bloated square look to it. And so I didn't draw that very well, but I'm thinking, why not actually put some of these things just in construction line weight down in there, since it's so empty and open here. And if I'm doing that, well, I have all these center lines struck already. All I really need to do is figure out where center line is on that CRT and draw myself a point normal through there. And if I can hit my ellipse degree right, this is the trick, I could just put some of these ellipses in there. I know where the minor axis is, so let's just try. Minor axis is there. Magnet might be there. There might be a secondary part that's kind of in here that has some thickness. I'm kind of winging it. I'm not really looking too much at the design. I'm really just kind of trying to get a sense of, okay, this is something going on inside here, really is all I'm trying to kind of say. Oh, there's details in here. There's components in here. And that was the whole idea of this design, was to demystify the box, to show the insides, to make, and you know what? You know what's really fascinating about it is that when you design something, when you're designing something to look good from a form-giving standpoint, most of us are focused on what the outside looks like and wrapping something. I'm going to hide this motor. I worked in power tools and we designed saws and drills and all that kind of stuff. Oh, we're going to wrap this motor with this shape and get all of this hidden up in here and all this kind of stuff. Well, that's all well and good, but boy, when you decide you're going to make a product clear, you're going to make the actual material clear instead of opaque. What it does is it means you've got to go in and say, oh, golly, I now have to make all the insides designed too. I now have to arrange. You know what? Industrial designers designed what the inside of those components looked like, where they went, how to route the wiring. They designed, that's normally engineers do that. But in this case, industrial designers, because you see this, it has to be composed just like the outer shell does. And so, as well as the internal bosses and things that hold the parts together. Normally you can slop all that together on the inside of a product, doesn't matter. But when you make it clear, it's like 4 times the work, 4 times the design work to make that look good. And so anyway, that's one of the reasons I've always been very impressed with this design. Was not whether you like the form or not, really isn't the main thing. The main thing is look in awe of the work that was done to compose all of those components beautifully inside there, because that was not at all an easy task. That was a big a big task. All right, well, I'm not gonna go inside too much here. I just wanted to play a little bit with what that might look like. All right. Okay, wrap it up, and let's get back next door again. Yep, I did better on that one than here's the first one. My first one's more stubby. Proportions might have been better on the first one, but I think the handle and all was much better on the, yeah, I got the handle and all much better. I think you could argue that when I extended that square a little bit more right at the beginning, I said, it feels a little stubby, and I extended it, probably shouldn't have done that. It probably would have been back, it's a little bit long. So I'm telling you, sometimes the constructions are working you and sometimes they're not. It's just kind of the process. Sorry I'm eating in front of you. I didn't get my lunch finished, so.